Today on Equal Matters, the benefits of changing your mind. Cal, the guitar hero, take us in. Today, something a little bit different at Equal Matters. I'm at DisneyLand, the place I didn't really like until a couple of years ago. I changed my mind. But first, a shout out to Cal, the guitar hero. You've heard him here on Equal Matters and his band, the Color 8. I just want to give him a shout out because he's currently in Europe playing guitar for an artist called Nice. That right there is pretty cool. But here at Disneyland, this is not a place I ever liked. I just thought it was a place for kids. I thought it was kind of kitschy, kind of boring. But I changed my mind. And this is interesting because I worked in an industry where it's not a great idea, you're told, to change your mind. For those unfamiliar, my name is Rob Hunter, host of Equal Matters. I was a radio talk show host for the last 23 years. I just stepped away from that role. In one of those debating bedrocks is typically you take your position, you stand firm in that position, and you argue that position and defend it as much as you can. But as I got older, I realized that there was a little bit of a stubborn approach to life, in that I only had my own limited perspective. So the power of changing your mind and the benefits of changing your mind is just about that. It's about opening up your perspective to look at something a different way. Disney is the perfect example. So I came when I was a kid. I grew up in Massachusetts. My grandmother lived in Florida, so every once in a while we'd get the family and the plane and fly down to Florida. I think we did it once or twice when we were kids, and it was great, right? Memories, what you have left. You're a little kid, you get excited about all these things. But when you go as an adult, sometimes you still look at it as a kid. I did, until a couple of years ago. And it all started when Mrs. Hunter, Amy, who you heard here on Equal Matters a couple of weeks ago, had me watch something on Disney+. It was a documentary about how they make Disney happen. Now, if you've been to Disneyland, Disney World, you know it's this big, huge place. Disneyland is the original, built in 1955. You look at this original castle, and you're like, wow, it's small compared to all the other ones. But in 1955, it was innovative. It was completely different. And when you look at it the first time, you might be like, oh, okay, that's it. Because you've been to Orlando and you've seen the big ornate one. But here now, completely different, because I changed that perspective. So I want to talk to Mrs. Hunter about that documentary that she had me watch, and we'll talk about how and why it changed my mind as we're here standing at the Rise of the Resistance ride in line at Disneyland. So, Amy, what was that documentary that you had me watch on Disney Plus called?
It was called The Imagineering Story.
And give me the brief synopsis of what the Imagineering Story is about.
Sure. So The Imagineering Story was a documentary that basically took you through the evolution of the Imagineering organization within Disney from inception through today. And basically they touched on how they brought these, say, group of misfits together to design and to come up with everything that we now see here today, both within the parks as well as within the stories that we know and love with Disney.
And they combine with some of the new ones. So it starts you with some of the old ones. So let's go back to 1955, the castle, the original Main Street. It's almost impossible to put yourself now in 2023 as we head up to 2024 in 1955 shoes. But that's one thing I think you can do. If you watch that documentary series, you start to see Disney as a whole. And you start to see Disney as a company as it grows. But what stood out to me, Amy, in that documentary is the vision that Walt Disney had, because it all starts with a vision. So he was doing cartoons, entertaining kids, and he started to get bigger and bigger and bigger visions to have a place that people could come and just have a ton of fun and experience so many different things that the world has to offer in one place. And when I started to see that vision, I started to understand a little bit more about Disney. So, Amy, what were some of the things in that documentary that stood out to you? Some of the things that they made, some of the creations that these Imagineers, as they call them, because they get to use their imaginations. What was some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, I'll say first and foremost, not even a particular ride or concept, but just how they organized as a team. They very much focused on, as you exactly said, they had a very clear vision of where and what they were doing and the why behind it, which is so key when you're trying to be an innovative culture and organization, whether it's in park design or in making widgets, whatever it is, it's having that really clear vision. And I think as a team, they were extremely agile and willing to try and fail and learn and try again. No one was stuck in one particular role. That's one of the things that I absolutely loved. They had an idea, they had a concept, whatever it was. I think the first thing that they started with was It's a Small World for the World's Fair. That was kind of what kicked all of this off. And it was basically anyone who wanted to pitch in, you can pitch in, and you can do things that maybe stretch you a little bit, go beyond maybe the world or the role or the skill set that you currently have. And through that, all of these people ended up developing this amazing set of skills. People who were modelers ended up being costume designers or set makers or even sometimes narrators or voicing some of the rides themselves. There was no limit to what an individual and their potential could be. It was just their willingness to try it and their curiosity to explore what's possible.
So do you see that when you walk around here? So we're currently in Star Wars land. This is one of the newer lands. There is one in Orlando. There is one here in LA at Disneyland. And there's also one we just happened to go to Disneyland Paris too, because we're apparently huge Disney fans here. So the detail is what stands out to me. So all that teamwork that you're talking about in how they put those little touches. Does it, because this is what you do, Amy. You work with teams to help them function as a team, to help them collaborate more so they can build something like Disney.
That is what I do, yes.
Mm-hmm. So when you watch that documentary, you see how that team operates and you see Star Wars lands. How does that all come together? So your theory is that the collaboration is what makes it possible, and secondly, really what can make work fun, whether you're working for Disney or anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes back to having a shared purpose, a shared vision, and having everyone in alignment and agreement of where you want to take it. That doesn't mean that you work in perfect harmony all the time. In fact, it's better if you don't, because then you're challenging one another. You're trying to push to what's possible. You know, one of the things that Walt Disney always talked about, and I love, and I try to bring this to the teams that I work with, is this idea of how can you plus the experience? And plus just means what additional thing, what one more thing could you do to make it just that more special, that more immersive, that more enjoyable for the guest? Because really, Walt Disney, what he did when he created Disneyland is he saw that, yeah, there were amusement parks, but they were just a series of rides. And he thought, you know, is there a way that I can actually bring people into the story, make them a character, make them part of these stories and these movies and these cartoons that audiences know and love? How can they become a part of it? And I think that's really been the big push with Disneyland, but also within any organization. How can you bring people into the story of your organization? How can you make them, you know, a character and a player within the growth that you're trying to take within your company? And I think that's what they did so beautifully, is that they were doing something completely different. They were trying something new. They were pushing the envelope. And through that, they created some amazing experiences here, down to the tiniest of details that, unless you're really taking the time to maybe slow down as you're wandering through. We purposefully, right now, we're in a line that's 75 minutes long. Rob, you said you didn't want to do it. I encouraged us to do it because it's an opportunity to actually admire and honor and appreciate all of these tiny details, all of this work and special care that these Imagineers put into creating this experience.
As at the end of the day, everything is an experience. Here at Disney, standing in the line, it's Star Wars land. Even the rocks that are not rocks, they're made, are meant to look like they're from another world. So here at Disney, that's what they do. This fence grate is also meant to look like it's from the movie Star Wars. It's those little details that matter here. And that's what I started to pay attention to, and how I started to alter my perspective and change my mind about this place was watching that Imagineering documentary. It's about the people to me. Because when you're here and you're looking at this creativity, you're looking at the best in the world at what they do. Like, for example, there are people that paint scenes here. For example, at the California Adventures, the second park out here in Los Angeles, there is a painting of what looks like a movie set. And someone painted that. And I'm looking at that the other day, and I'm thinking to myself, having seen Michelangelo's paintings, some of the other famous painters like Van Gogh, when you look at these in person and you're just stunned at the creativity. It's the same thing here. We don't have modern Michelangelos, but we have Imagineers in that sense at Disney, that in the distance we can see one of the otherworldly Star Wars craft. It's life-size, it's got all the details, it looks exactly like it looks in the movie. That's why I started to change my mind, because I tied in that vision of what originally Walt had. And then, Amy, if you think about how a vision lasts longer than Walt. Walt passed away, I can't remember the year. It was before Disney World opened in 71. I think it was like 66 he passed away or something like that. And now here we are 60 years later, and his vision is still being worked on. That is also, when you think about a brand that goes beyond a personality, right? Goes beyond Walt. Now, he was the centerpiece of it, but his legacy is here every single day. That's another part where you start to understand, when you get in the business world, what it takes to be able to do that. And I think that's exactly what you said, Amy. It's that attention to detail, but having good teams that build this. Because I look at this fence work, and the fences here, it's like almost warped, right, to give it a little bit different look, and they've got some kind of rust on it, so it looks otherworldly. To me, I look at this stuff and I'm like, oh my God, that's such a tedious task. But to someone that just vibes with this creativity, this is the best place for them to be able to do that. And to create an atmosphere as a company like Disney, to foster that, is really what helps a company grow beyond the founder and continue as a brand. And I think that was also very apparent in the Imagineering documentary that we watched. What was it called again?
The Imagineering Story.
See, there we go, the Imagineering Story. Did you get that sense too, as someone that works with teams and studies teams, that this Disney is an example of a company, at least in that realm, that does it right?
Yes, I'm not going to say that they probably do it perfectly. I'm sure that they have struggles with their teams, just because we are a bunch of humans trying to work with other humans, which it's naturally going to happen. But I think that at least, I can't speak about what it is today. I think today they're still trying to very much encourage this kind of innovative R&D, try again culture. But I think that at least originally, and what the documentary and all the stories you hear about show, is this idea of true collaboration. And again, it all goes back to that idea of shared vision, shared purpose, shared why, having guardrails around it, but then letting people play and be creative. And that's where the magic can truly happen. That's where you get these amazing rides and sets and movies that come out, because it's people who are willing to say, well, what about this? Have we tried that? What if we added this one little thing in there? What if we took this piece away? What would that look like? And people going, yeah, okay, let's try that. Let's see what happens.
So how would a team push themselves using that model to go that extra mile? Because my area in working with teams is how teammates communicate. Often I find people are challenged with giving each other feedback when they want to push someone to help make it better. So Andre 3000 is my favorite artist. He just released a flute album. He's been a rapper his entire life, one of the greatest rappers of all time. But he just said that when it comes to change and when it comes to making things better, what he did is he took his flute music to a couple of artists that he really likes, Tyler the Creator and Frank Ocean. And he was at Tyler the Creator's house, and he's playing this album because he wants feedback so that they can make it better. And he says, I took their feedback as that, not criticism, as feedback, because they came with this idea, Tyler and Frank, that they were trying to help it. And how do you establish that if you're a team, whether it's Disney or a team that you work with?
Well, first and foremost, it starts with getting raw and real, because you can't have any type of effective feedback opportunity or experience if you don't have trust.
Okay, let me ask you, what do you mean by raw and real? Because that word raw, it means different things.
Yeah, thanks for asking. When I think about raw, I think not sugarcoating it, not, as we so often hear, not doing feedback sandwiches where the majority of what's being said is just a bunch of empty calories and cake. It's really focused on the meat. It's establishing a level of trust so that you feel comfortable receiving more critical yet constructive feedback. It's not accusing people, it's not slinging insults across at one another, what you're doing wrong or how you're screwing up, but it's being able to have a communication to say, hey, you know what, it appears that you're struggling with XYZ. How can I help? Where might we be able to work together? But in order to do that, you first and foremost have to have some really good trust baseline foundational activities. And it's something that doesn't necessarily happen organically. Trust is something that you have to work on as a team, and you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable with one another. And so a lot of what we try to focus on is first, having those, all right, let's just put it all out on the table and let's get honest with each other, but also let's understand one another a little bit more. Let's take the time to recognize and acknowledge maybe where each of us struggle, where each of us are doing really well, and how we can help support one another. That's how you can create a baseline of trust, how you operate.
So you got to get down into the muck, is what you're saying. And you have to understand that it's personal, but it's not. And that's what I found in working on radio teams and with radio teams, is that with a bunch of type A personalities, always ready to perform, you got to approach your team as a certain way, and you got to trust a certain way.
Well, and y'all pretty full of opinions too. That's
a big challenge, and that's why this changing of your mind is also difficult, because what we hear as resistance, and one of the businesses that I work on is the one I work on with Amy. It's her company that she founded called Painted Port Strategies. That resistance is that people can't change. But I'm living proof that you can change. And one of the ways that I started to change was by changing my mind about simple things. Disney is just one example. I'll give you another example. For a long time, and if you've listened to Equal Matters, you've heard me say this, I was operating under this belief that I had about myself that I was not good enough. So because I had that belief, that's what I looked for. I looked for proof of it. I compared myself to everybody else. And that led my life. But changing your mind about something like Disney, because you can consider a different perspective. So instead of just thinking about this place one-dimensionally as a place for kids, I thought about it from that standpoint of the creativity, the teamwork, in that adherence to excellent quality. And when I started to do that, I could start to change my mind about my own beliefs about myself. Because it just gives you a little bit more room, because just as you consider the same perspective shift about Disney, you can consider a shift about your own life. So for me, there was that one phrase I heard, is all it took. It just gave me a little bit of wiggle room, and I could start to work with it. Your thoughts are not your own. So when I started to think about, you're not good enough, I would tell myself, your thoughts are not your own. And what that would do is give me a break from the old and give me room to consider something new. Something similar happened here at Disney, in that looking at those details and paying attention to the teams. Because I want to change maybe your perspective if you run a team or you work with a team, that people can change. It just requires some skills to know how to do that. If you're looking at this, Amy, again, in the rise of the resistance ride, and you're thinking about how many times the plans had to change in order to meet the vision, how would a team on such a large project adapt to new challenges that show up all the time?
Well, first and foremost, I would say it's going back to what you talk about a lot, is having consistent and regular feedback opportunities. So that way, when those challenges are presented, it's a lot easier to address because it's not something that has to be completely abandoned and redone. You're regularly checking in. One of the great things that actually the Imagineers do for any project, whether it's a ride, a movie, a television show, is they practice the art of storyboarding, which is essentially pre-plotting out what you want this experience to look like. In the business world, we would call those business workflows. Basically plotting out how this experience, how this activity is going to proceed from point A to point Z. And you have that as a guide, whether it's a literal storyboard with pictures and people, which I kind of encourage. I think that's fun because it humanizes it more. It's less about a box and more about the activity and the people performing within that box. But I would say storyboarding it out. And then also just being flexible, being able to challenge one another. It all goes back to that trust. So when there is a need to pivot, again, it's still sticking with the original goal of the storyboard and the ultimate vision and purpose of the project that you're pursuing.
Trust in building it. You mentioned it a little while ago. How do you get to a point, obviously we're in line, so you can hear some background noise here. How do you get to a point where people can trust each other? Because we all have our own insecurities, and sometimes when someone says their truth, it stings you. So if you're in this setting and you have a team of 4 or 8 and they're airing their grievances, how does that build trust? And how do you take what they say and turn it into an opportunity?
Well, you're not just shit-talking to one another. I mean, that's not what this is about. Like I said at the beginning, it's not, when I say airing of grievances, it's not airing of people grievances. We focus on the action, the activity, the thing, not the person necessarily performing it. That's first and foremost. But along with that, it's learning some tools and techniques to, I'll say not take it personally, but really it's more so learning how to consume the feedback without letting it consume you.
What's a skill that would allow you to do that?
Well, one of the things that we teach on the Painted Porch is a Stoic principle called the dichotomy of control.
What is the dichotomy of control?
Well, the dichotomy of control essentially says that you only have control over you. You don't have control over other people, their thoughts, their actions, their reactions, their behaviors, or circumstance. So when it comes to this idea of feedback and feedback within a team, this doesn't mean that you can just say whatever you want because it's not your problem, it's somebody else's. It's basically saying, recognize that when you're receiving feedback, the only thing that you can control is how you choose to receive, perceive, and then react to that information. You have a conscious choice that you can make. You can choose to be offended, you can choose to take it personally, or you can choose to view it as feedback that someone is providing to you that you can then do something about or take action on, or maybe not take action on because possibly the feedback is you're doing too much.
How do I create that space for myself to not react? Because my automatic reaction is to either feel something and say something related to that emotion, or it is just to think something and then just say it out loud. Maybe it's to defend myself if someone's given me some feedback that is critical. What are the steps that you teach in order to be able to take a second?
Well, we have an entire day's workshop all focused on this and how you can more effectively give and receive feedback and how you process it. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to before you react or respond, you just pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, how true is this thought, this feeling that I'm experiencing as a result of this feedback? Or, more importantly, what if the opposite were true? I think both of those are really helpful to help you challenge your own automatic negative thoughts that might pop in.
I think that's a great way to say it. Challenge your own negative thoughts. And that ties into what we're doing here and the ability to change your mind. I heard Beastie Boys, MCA was one of the Beastie Boys. He passed away a few years ago. The Beastie Boys put out a documentary, and on that documentary, they talked about MCA and how he changed his mind. And he said something to the effect that, I'd rather be a hypocrite than not grow and change. To be considered a hypocrite is often the label you get put on you if you're like, oh, you changed your mind on a political position. Oh, okay. That is part of feedback, too, is that growth, that understanding that's just because someone said something, it doesn't have to impact you. It's just trying to figure out those tools and techniques, that breath, that pause, so that you can not only deliver better feedback, more quality feedback, more helpful feedback, but you can also accept it as well.
Yeah, and to that end, we also spend a lot of time when it comes to feedback, the type of feedback or how to give feedback effectively. I think just innately, many of us, when we give feedback, it's you aren't good. You're behaving badly. You screwed this up. We focus on the individual, but the Stoics teach us that a person is just a person. It's really their behavior that is the driver of our judgments. And so when it comes to even the way that we assign feedback and we start judging other people, it's more effective to provide feedback on the behavior, not the person. That activity that you did maybe was a little lacking. It appeared as though there wasn't enough research done for XYZ, or there was shortcuts that were taken. It's not you're lazy, it's what you maybe did or didn't do that was lazy. So it's the verb, not the noun, that you focus on.
How does it work in relationships? It's the same way. The feedback that comes between, say, husband and wife or partners, how do you use your feedback skills when you have to give me feedback?
Well, I'm still learning and trying to perfect that every day. I am a human. I am not perfect. I make my mistakes, or mistakes are made by me, I should say. But I think it's the same principle. It's instead of coming in with pointing, again, focusing on the person, if you separate the person from their behavior, just like your thoughts are not your own, what that really is trying to say is that your immediate thoughts or feelings are not you. They are not who you are. They are simply just an action that is happening within you. Just like you don't think your heart or your brain is quote unquote you, they are organs within your body. The same thing is true when it comes to your thoughts or feelings. They are an organ, if you will. They're an entity within your body, but they aren't you at your core.
I try to approach it in this perspective shift of what am I really trying to say? And what is the goal of me saying this? Is it to improve our relationship, or is it just to be a dick? Because sometimes your emotions make you say things that you instantly wish you could catch and put back in your mouth because you didn't stop and think. So that is one of the things that I had to work on and still have to work on, is that sometimes when those emotions come up, you say those crazy things. And that's all tied in to this perspective of Disney and shifting it, because this can be done in any area of your life, whether it's your relationship, whether it's at work with your teams, whether it's with your friends, is changing your approach by finding the thing that just makes you take a second. For me, you mentioned it, Amy, taking a breath is massive. Someone says something, take a little breath, let me think about what I want to say. And I may say, I don't have anything to add right now. I'm going to think about this and I'm going to get back to you. I think that's a reasonable response in certain situations as well, especially if those emotions are welling up and you want to retort back or defend yourself. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, and I think that's one of the bases of building trust with other people. So whether it's in a romantic relationship, your friendships, or on your team, it shows that you're human, but you're working on growing and bettering yourself. And I would say that when we think about Disney and we were talking about the Imagineers, a lot of that came down to the trust that they had. Sometimes did they, fly off the handle? Did they lose their shit? Probably, absolutely. It's a high pressure situation. There's hard deadlines. They're trying to get a park opened, by a certain day, or a ride open by a certain day and not have it break down the first day. So there's definitely high pressure, but you can learn how to effectively manage that pressure, both with how you work with one another, how you talk to one another, and then obviously the third piece, which is our third pillar on the porch, is how you actually handle those moments of stress through mindfulness, reflection, and emotional intelligence.
Explain what that means, the mindfulness component of it. So when I think of mindfulness, I just think of being considerate of other people.
Yes, that's certainly part of it. It's being considerate of other people, but it's also just being mindful of yourself, checking in with yourself, recognizing how and in what ways you are either consciously or unconsciously choosing to show up in any situation or in a moment or with someone. It's recognizing, especially when we think about emotional intelligence, it's not suppressing your emotions. It's not, quote unquote, controlling them, if you will. It's recognizing when and how your emotions are actually showing up, so that way you can more consciously choose and decide how they're going to then play out. To your exact point, not having someone say something and then regret and having to try to take it back. It's actually having that recognition to go, ooh, you know what? I'm feeling a little angry right now. I think I need to take a pause or take a moment.
Take a walk. That's what I love. If I'm not sure, I need to clear my head, I need to clear the emotions out, I definitely take a walk. But the mindful component is really, to me, about understanding how you operate. And the essence of change to me, and changing your mind, which leads you to changing your perspective, whether it's about Disney or anything else that you want to reconsider. When you reconsider things, you start to understand how you work and why you arrived at a conclusion, or something that happened in the past that no longer applies now still applies because you still believe that same thing. So going back to Rob's not good enough. I use that because that was that centerpiece that drove a lot of my decision making. Had I not reconsidered that, I'd still be making decisions from that standpoint. And just a side note, we're now in the armory, in the wait at Rise of Resistance, which goes back to your point, though, Amy, that sometimes when you're in a line, if you stop and notice, you see things. So in this, they have lockers in this Rise of the Resistance ride. Lockers with fake guns in there, Star Wars guns. Look like outer space guns. They've got bombs. They've got power switches. It's absolutely stunning, the level of detail when you do have to wait in a 75-minute line that you get to see. But even that right there is a shift in perspective. It's all about what you think about and what you focus on to get back to understanding yourself. So if you are on a team and you know that maybe your team is going to struggle to change, the change can start with you. And the change starts with one tool, one tick, one trick to be able to create that space for yourself, to be able to reconsider a position or to not be vocal in that moment. We just heard something the other day, I forget exactly the word it was, in Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, is how your tongue always wants to talk. Learning how to tame it is such a great tool for yourself because you don't say what you're thinking right away. And if you're trying to be strategic, you don't give yourself away in another component of that. So, Amy, do you agree that the mindfulness component really is about understanding yourself? Because you have your thoughts and you have your emotions, and they impact you in certain ways. It's being mindful or paying attention to that makes a massive difference.
Yes, 100%. That is the core. It's really the most basic foundational component of being an effective team member, an effective leader, an effective partner, is recognizing how and in what ways you are showing up for yourself and for others. And also through that, learning some techniques, some tools that you can have in your toolbox that when you start to feel those moments of frustration, aggravation, anger, anxiety, stress, whatever it might be, fill in the blank, right? All of those fun emotions, you have some things that you can practice to help you kind of recalibrate and get back to a state of good. I do want to also point out one other thing. Just as we're walking through this queue, again, when we think about this idea of waits in lines, especially at a theme park like Disney, there are so many people who don't want to wait in the line because of the time that it's taking. But if you think about this on the reverse, especially the more recent rides where there's been a lot of thought and intention around creating an experience while you wait, you would pay sometimes $50 or more to go to a museum and to walk around and to admire the art. This is someone's art. These are sculptures. These are paintings in their own way. These are exhibition pieces that you can go through as you're going through this line and admire the artistry and the craftsmanship that was put into this queue.
That's that human creativity. Amy and I went to New York a year ago as of this recording, and we went to the MoMA. It was the MoMA, right? The Met. We went to the Met, one of the museums in New York. And there is a wing there by one of the guys that founded a bank that no longer exists. Think back to the 07-08 crash. And in there was a Renoir. And I'm not much for art until I saw this Renoir. Because what dawned on me as I was sitting there is this is another human's creativity, another human's inspiration, another human's idea. The painting was a seascape from the sea, the vantage point. Impressionist art, so its composition is cloudy or hazy, maybe a little muddled, done that way on purpose. I always thought that was how the memory works. Our memories are fuzzy. They remember things differently than they actually happen. Certain things stand out to us about events versus someone else has a different interpretation that went to the same event. So I bring that up because that same reason, and I look in here, is that there are a bunch of Renoirs in here that most of the time we don't even notice. And they're not Renoirs as impressionist art, but these are stoneworkers or these are fabricators who come up with these designs and make cool suitcases that we're looking at right now that are kind of metal-based but space-agey. That's the fun of this that sometimes you miss when you skip the line. Because life is all about what you pay attention to. That's essentially what we're saying. And that goes back to another thing that Andre 3000 said in a recent interview, is that pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Because when you pay attention to what you're paying attention to, you almost have this higher view of what's happening. And pay attention to what you're paying attention to. If you are constantly looking at the negative, you're constantly looking at what's wrong, pay attention to that part and say, wow, I really am focusing on the negative. And then you can just take that one little pause to notice what you're doing, and then you can shift your thinking like I have done at Disney.
And I would say one other piece of advice, just to kind of wrap up this thought, and that is also every once in a while, try to see things through a child's eyes. Because when you view things through a child's eyes, it opens up such a broader perspective that you otherwise wouldn't see, which I look forward to hearing Connor's perspective on this park and this experience.
About to go on the ride, Rise of the Resistance. Here we go.
So your favorite ride at Disneyland is?
Indiana Jones.
And why is it your favorite ride?
Because there's snakes chasing you.
Snakes. You like snakes?
Not at all. Not like snakes. I already told you that.
You don't like snakes? But
No.
you like this ride because it has snakes.
I only like rides with fake snakes.
Oh, only if they're fake snakes. I gotcha. Okay.
What is this?
It's a microphone.
But there's no speakers to go with it,
There's no speakers.
so no one can hear it.
Connor, what did you think after Indiana Jones?
Good.
Good? What's your favorite part of the ride? I like when you see the rock, the big boulder.
I like the whole entire thing, except I wanted to be alone on the ride.
Rise of the Resistance, the ride. So they set you up, give you the story that you're going on a mission as a recruit, and you walk into this life-size spaceship to get your positions. The point of this ride is full immersion, Rise of the Resistance. We're on a transport, and they have life-size figures from the Star Wars universe that are going to take you on this journey. Like, this is the one where Disney really elevated their game to make you a part of the story.
Stay strong! Cargo vessel TR-141, identify yourselves, prepare to
We've been caught by the bad guys. We're being pulled in to the Star Destroyer.
By whose authority are we being detained?
Where the life part comes in is when you get off this.
Now bring down your shields and prepare
We're
to be boarded.
recreating what it would be like to be in a Star Wars Star Destroyer.
They'll want the location of our secret base. Tell them nothing.
So you walk off the ship and you're looking at stormtroopers right in your face. We're now on a Star Destroyer. Looks very menacing, very lifelike, because they even have a screen up there where you can see out into space with another Star Destroyer moving and some TIE fighters. The level of detail in here is just stunning.
Insane.
Human ingenuity and creativity. And this is great too because they took a George Lucas concept, and when Disney bought it, they immediately started to envision how they could bring you as a Disney guest inside Star Wars. So now we go to part 2. So it feels like you're in a detention center, which is how they set it up. You're a rebel, you join the cause, you get on the transport, you're gonna go complete your mission, but of course the Empire comes and grabs you. So now you're standing and waiting like you're going to jail because you're a rebel spy.
The escape pod just below us. Take the lift down. Company, hurry! No, not up! I said down!
Rise of the Resistance is Disney's boldest experience yet. You are on a little transport car that appears to move with magnets or something under the floor.
It's like a giant Roomba.
Giant Roomba is the way that Amy says it. But what's cool is the land area that ride covers is massive because you're on a Star Destroyer. And you go underneath these AT-ATs while you're in there. So you have this big tall ceiling. And then they take that little Land Rover thing and they park it. And then you have that virtual experience where it feels like you're flying. So you combine 2 different ride styles into one, which is why it's awesome. Chris Hunter, what do you think?
It is pretty dope.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Rise of the Resistance, like a 15-minute long ride. Amy, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely brilliant and is a nod to the ever-evolving genius of Disney and their Imagineering talented teams.
This one's all about immersion. This is, to me, the one that feels the most lifelike of them all. Disneyland also has a newer feature, Olga's Cantina. This is straight out of the scene where Han Solo shoots Greedo. Who shot first?
Han definitely shot first.
Definitely Han. Chris Hunter, Han Solo and Greedo. Who shot first?
Han Solo.
We have the consensus here in Olga's Cantina that Han Solo was the perpetrator for Greedo. I have to rewatch. I change my mind on it all the time while we're here talking about changing mind. I'm not sure. But this is cool because it is like that scene, and it's built up in there. Also, where Obi-Wan chops a guy's arm off with his lightsaber. I mean, very, very rambunctious kind of place in the Star Wars movies. Here, a little less so. We just getting some drinks and hanging out in a Star Wars theme. They do have a droid DJ, which is pretty cool also. But going back to those details, everything about this place looks like you're in another world. Looks like you're in Tatooine. Agree?
Agree. And to that end, I will say that again, thinking about the nod to the old, the DJ is actually the old robot from the Star Tours ride, who they just recently replaced with C-3PO.
His retirement gig.
Exactly. Not the best DJ, but he tries his best.
What stands out to you about the cantina?
Again, the attention to detail. It looks like it's been here a while. It's the perfection in the imperfection, I would say, is where they do a stunning job with their design. Everything down to the last little bit. There's nothing here that is not meant to be here. Kind of like, as you like to quote Andre 3000, since we're having that kick, there is no whack thing in here, just like Andre never does. Never, what is it? He never has a whack rhyme.
This episode is entirely about changing your mind, changing your perspective. We're going on Jungle Cruise, and truth is, I was like, nah, it's kind of a boring ride. But my brother said, you get a chance to hear real comedy. So because Chris gave me a different perspective, now I'm looking forward to the ride, even though I thought it was boring like 15 minutes ago. As we wrap up a day here at DisneyLand in California, it's not just changing your mind, broaden your perspective that matters. It's also realizing what is possible. When you come to a place like Disneyland, this was one man's vision, his idea that he turned into reality. So it doesn't really matter whether you like Disney or not, you think it's cheesy. What is possible is essentially proven here. Anything that you want. I'm Rob Hunter. Good night.